about VOBA. We also did with VOBA just welcome 3 new board members, including Laura McLaughlin, who'll be the first speaker in the panel. TJ Whalen and your former colleague Wendy Knight has joined the VOBA board as well. So that's pretty great. We're super excited on that side of it. Just to sort of set the stage for it, a quick introduction for who I am and what I do. My name is Drew Simmons. I'm the president of Pale Morning Media, which is it's a communications agency, PR agency. There's a variety of terms for it, but basically we work with about 12 to 15 companies, organizations, associations around the country in the outdoor industry. And as part of that, I get a chance to ask people about their businesses, about their successes, about their failures, and hear a lot. And so, I think one of the big takeaways for VOREC has always been that what's happening in Vermont is never happening in a vacuum. There's a lot of other businesses around the country who are going through, and organizations and governmental agencies who are going through very similar things. And, around the country, I just am about to start talking about some specialty independent outdoor retail numbers from the year. And I think Commissioner Hanford was starting to touch on it. The numbers, which I have some pretty interesting ones, last February was pretty good. People were about 4 to 5% up in that category. March kind of went off a cliff. People were down, anywhere from 30 to 50%. April was 50 to 80%. And then May, it started to come back. And June was really the first up month in a long time where we saw this outdoor resurgence. People were clearly heading outside. But I think much like everything else, it's really inaccurate to say that everyone in the outdoor industry, everyone in retail was a rising tide. What you see when you look at these numbers is that the bell curve has sharpened. Yes, there are some retailers and companies that are up much more than they expected, but on the other side of the bell curve, there's just as many companies and retailers that are down much more than they expected. And the reasons for those successes and failures are really complicated. It's your product blend, it's your location, how close you are to an outdoor resource. It has to do with your local government. How serious was the shutdown in your area? And so what we've all tried to do, whether we're a nonprofit or a for-profit, is try to adjust, right? And personally, as a member of the for-profit business community, one of probably my top 3 least favorite words of the last year is pivot. Usually pivot is a term used by somebody else telling you what you should do with your business so you don't crash and burn during 2020. Most of the time for my industry, it means doing the same amount of work for less money with fewer staff. And I think that's what we're seeing across Vermont right now, even in the places that are open and doing pretty well. I think, we're about to have 5 speakers who are going to join us here. We're going to have a retailer, RJ from Vermont Huts, Luke from FPR, Steve Wright from J Peak, and Ollie Barras from Craftsbury. It's really interesting. As much as we would all like there to be simple, singular policies that help everyone get through this, the reality is there's some really nuanced conversations out there. So there's some unique challenges and some opportunities that are hard fought and hard gained. And it's anyway. I'm going to sort of cede the microphone here a little bit. I will ask people that if you want to weigh in with a question, please type it into the chat. But we're going to start with Laura from Pinnacle Ski and Sports. Laura, are you there? Laura, could you introduce yourself and give a kind of a quick overview of the business, what it looks like, where it is, what goes on there?
Sure, absolutely. So hi, everybody. My name is Laura McLaughlin. I work at Pinnacle Ski and Sports in the brick and mortar store, but also have the component of skiessentials.com to our business as well. And our online to brick and mortar from a sales perspective is about 80-20 at this point right now, which has increased over the last few months for some obvious reasons. We're about a 5,000 square foot brick and mortar store. And within that, we're kind of divided into, I'd say, about 3 different parts. So we've got our soft goods in your hard goods where you buy your jackets and your skis and your helmets. We have a dedicated space to our bike service area as well. And then we also have a boot shop component, which is a very hands-on custom boot work environment. So in following the guidelines that the state has put out, we can fit about 82 people into the total 5,000 square foot area around there. Haven't come close to hitting that 82 people, which is probably good because it would be quite full. And then we've actually taken the boot shop component and leveraged it down to about 7 people. So it's definitely a little bit more intimate, but safer for everybody that is functioning in a smaller space. And then within the business, we've also kept our functionality of a first come, first serve, walk in the store. We work with you as you come in, open in the main area, but then allocated the boot shop where it is more intimate and small spaced area to an appointment based. And if they have availability, they'll take a walk in, but that way it just limits the potential interactions, as we are very well aware that people are either not aware or not following the guidelines set forth by the state. They're just trying to keep both customers and our retail staff safe during everything that's going on.
That's great. So just as a quick overview of what we're going to try to talk about with everybody is, we're really interested in basically boots on the ground information from what people are seeing right now. We had a panel discussion back in September about what to expect from this coming winter. This panel is going to be, this is what we're seeing in this coming winter. And so there's three questions we're going to try to ask everybody, if I can remember and stay on point. And one's going to be, what did your preseason preparations look like? What changes have you made? What have you learned? And what do you need to keep moving forward? So Laura, if you could talk a little bit about, you knew this COVID winter was coming. What were some of the preparations, and when were you starting to adjust your business, and how'd that go?
We started adjusting our business back in March before the shutdown. The owners were actually out west, and we were in preparation for buying closeout buys, which is allows us to support our business by having better margins and offering consumers a discount. So we saw the wave coming in the shutdowns, and the owners were out west trying to get home. Immediately started shifting plans from all buyers' capacities within the store, and also trying to figure out what would be coming down the pipeline. And then when the shutdown actually happened, we started trying to figure out how to make ourselves accessible as we were deemed essentials with the bike component to the business. So turned on home delivery, home pickup, a concierge program, if you will, that has continued on and expanded in our business model right now. While we were shut down, for people entering the store, we could still interact with them on the outside of the building. So that proved to actually be okay. People were willing to do that with us. And then in April, we started making changes physically to the building. So adding the plexiglass, positioning the store, taking away furniture, moving the racks around, adding a UV room so that everything could be sanitized, as well as implementing UV wands throughout the store so that we could sanitize immediately, as well as long-term things. As we opened up in May, we were all a little cautious, and we were still learning what COVID was and how it interacted with the customers and ourselves. So as time has gone on, we have noticed complacency might be a little bit of a harsh word, but there is definitely a level of complacency. But there's also a level of awareness, as the doors had to be shut and the windows couldn't be open because it's 7 degrees outside. We can only wear so many insulated jackets. So as the doors have kind of closed from a weather perspective, it's just more interacting with the customers, letting them know that we have a UV wand, that we're making it as safe as possible, that there's hand sanitizers throughout the store. We give free masks, we give free gloves. We're willing to meet you outside. We've also expanded our concierge program so that we have gone from having 1 van to 3. 2 of those vans are dedicated with a concierge manager and team. They go to the person who doesn't feel comfortable coming to the store. So that has kind of been the shift into the fall and winter season.
For sure. So sort of shifting the next question of what have you learned since we've been in this process? When you and I were talking last night, you said that one of the things that's kind of come up as part of your shift in business has been talking to other retailers and sharing some best practices. Can you talk a little bit about how that's gone and some of the things that might be coming out of that?
Sure, absolutely. My background is wholesale, so have traveled the upstate New England area as well as upstate New York. So took that and called out to some people as we were shut down as well to see what they were implementing, to see if we could offer anything that we had to them as well, so that we were kind of all opening as best we could. So have continued that and just chatting with people, and it all seems that the UV concept is resonating extremely well. It works with the staffing, it works with the customers. They're very appreciative that we are taking the measures to do that versus getting the product off the floor for 24, 36, 72 hours, not having it available to sell. So that's worked very well. The communication when people walk in the store has been another huge component, welcoming them, making them feel greeted, having the signage to say welcome back. And then greeting them and letting them know that the process is that you will try something on and we will take it from you to sanitize it. And that word sanitize has resonated extremely well. So
For sure. For sure. Also, some of the things that maybe you've learned since opening for the winter season, could you talk about some of the trends of what's selling, as well as some of the trends and how it's going working with some of those companies?
sure. So we had about 2 weeks of a lull in July and maybe a couple of weeks of a lull in November. And then other than that, it has been very busy. The very first thing we started to notice was in August, a huge shift towards, call it kind of an insurance policy with AT gear, alpine touring gear, cross country snowshoes. September, October, even after Columbus Day, the weekend after Columbus Day was bigger than Columbus Day for us. It was really busy, so much so that I think people thought they were going to come up here and not have the traffic that we did. So people that were moving or moving new to the area, we call them our new locals. They were buying the gear that they've never had before, or if they were going to a different location, a lot of our clientele lives in Utah or Colorado for the wintertime. They were buying the gear from us before they headed out west because they had heard rumblings that they weren't going to be able to get it once they got out west during that drive time. So at this point, we can't keep snowshoes in the retail store. They're selling too fast online. Customers call, we advise them to buy what they see online as they can, because we can't always guarantee it will be in the store for them to actually look at it. And then the other component to that is our vendors are really good partners with us. We try to reciprocate back and forth with them. Where the stumbling blocks have been is some of the shipping capacities. There are a lot of container ships sitting out in the ocean right now outside of LA that can't get in because the shipping ports shut off and on because of COVID, and then the truckers off and on because of COVID. So there's shipping delays that way. A lot of broken orders. We might get 4 more snowshoes before the holidays, and then we're hoping for the rest of them after the holidays. And then there was a warehouse fire in Europe that took out quite a bit of inventory as well. So where there was backup inventory, there is no longer backup inventory. And then the biking component, it will continue. We're still receiving bike racks that were ordered in July, like this week.
Right. Yeah, I think you and I were talking about it, just to sort of shed some light on the supply chain issues. There was, I think it was the CEO of Specialized saying that basically their inventory for 2021 is already spoken for. And if you have a new bike request, it's going to be 350 days till you can get it. So even though categories are booming, you got to be at the front of the line to get that product. Let me ask you this, the clientele that's coming into your shop, how many of those are locals and how many of those are potentially out-of-staters?
It is hard to tell because there are enough people that have out-of-state plates. When the DMVs were shut, they were carrying around utility bills because they were worried that if they got pulled over, they couldn't prove that they were Vermonters. There are people that are unwilling to talk about it. We have a loyalty program where we give a percentage back to the customer and we verify the information. And if the information is out of date and says they're from another state, they're very quick to correct and to say, I'm a Vermonter right now. To let us know that they've been in and they've done the quarantine and following the rules. So, we have a lot of second homeowners, third homeowners in Stowe. So it's hard to put a number on that. But what I will say is that while we do have a lot of our business customers that are avid skiers, there's still a lot of new people that are coming in that are doing seasonal rentals for heels clipped in alpine lift service skiing, as much as the AT gear. So
For sure.
there's new and experienced people as well.
Well, so you guys have clearly made really smart, forward-looking changes for this year. What do you think you need, both for your store as well as for other stores in the state? What's needed to keep moving forward successfully for the rest of the winter?
Continued support from a marketing avenue. So definitely from an out of state, just to keep people in the loop. And in my humble opinion, it would be in many medium forms. So not just a news outlet partnership with a news channel down in Boston or Philadelphia or something, because every generation uses a different format. So I'm extremely old and gray-haired now using Facebook because the younger generation uses Instagram and Snapchat. So looking at how we're communicating to get to the most amount of people, because someone who's 18 and 20 can drive with a group of friends and come up, they may not be watching TV. They might not even have cable. So looking at those different mediums. And then looking forward also, we tried very hard to keep as many people on as we could for as long as we could. It was hard to set people free, if you will, back in March, not even understanding if they were going to have their summer job. But at the same time, trying to figure out how to keep as many people as possible. So when looking at funding, if there's a way to look at it from a long-term perspective, and say, we can give you what you expected to pay out to keep the business going longer versus a quick blurb, that would be incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I think I fully agree. And it's interesting about the messaging to out-of-state visitors. I think what I've heard in a lot of conversations ahead of this call is that there's a perception and a reality that the messages coming from Vermont are mixed. There's this, well, yes, we want you to quarantine, but we also want you to come. And while we all understand the reasons for both of them, if somebody only hears half the message, it can be challenging if you're on the other side of the fence. So I think those are some real and legitimate conversations that would likely need to be had. Well, thank you. I'm going to move on to RJ with Vermont Huts. RJ, could you unmute yourself and introduce yourself and talk a little bit about how Vermont Huts started the process of preparing for this winter?
Thanks, Drew. Hi, everyone. Good to be here. Nice to see some familiar faces and new ones. So as I said earlier, the ED of Vermont Huts Association, and we actually also are based here in Stowe, operating now from home office, as many are, and we have huts as far south in our network as Rupert, and as far north as Bloomfield, Vermont, in partnership with other operators, and both private and nonprofit. To kind of speak to Drew's question, we started planning for the winter back in March, I guess you could say, because we shut down, similar to others, we shut down prior to the mandated shutdown, not much further in advance, but a few days. And we began thinking about what winter actually looked like before we started thinking about summer, because historically winter has been our busier season. So we wanted to ensure that we had a concrete plan in the winter months, which then we could just implement during the summer as well. So we started reaching out to ACCD, and in consultation with their guidance, and then some of our other partner operators, such as the Green Mountain Club, we worked to identify a logical approach to backcountry hut facilities. And the challenge was that there was initially guidance that we weren't very certain about in terms of cleaning between guests, the turnover, buffer period between guests. These things that at a hotel or a traditional bed and breakfast, you may have staff to assist with the cleaning. In a backcountry hut facility, that just doesn't exist, and it's unrealistic for us to staff in that manner. So we were able to come up with a solution that put the burden on the guests and the responsibility on the guests to clean, that is to say, sanitize the touch surfaces in the hut with some very strong messaging and a set of checklists that guests were required to fill out upon arrival and departure. So there was effectively a double cleaning going on between guests.
So RJ, initially, just to be clear, the cleaning protocol was because you were being considered more of a hotel, and so you adjusted that, or were you being considered a ski business and adjusting it?
Yeah, no, we were not being considered a ski business, thankfully. I forget how we were which bucket we initially fell in, but I knew at the time we knew that just wasn't going to work. If I recall, it was maybe some type of cottage situation, and in any event, they were still asking for, I believe, some type of cleaning to occur. The good thing was it didn't actually specify who needed to do that cleaning. And so that's where we were able to work with ACCD to come up with a logical solution, recognizing that our guests are very much capable of carrying out those tasks on their own in such a simple structure.
Great. And so in terms of how you prepared for this coming winter and knowing that there would be strong demand, did you adjust any other policies, booking or cancellations?
We did, yeah. So when it comes to booking, when we first reopened in June, we implemented a buffer day policy. So, if you were checking out on Sunday morning, the next guest could not check in until Monday to allow for that buffer, because it was uncertain how long the virus could live in the air at that point. So we really tried to let the science and the data that was out there guide our decision making. And we also had new cancellation policies, of course, to remain flexible and not encourage sick individuals to travel to the hut. So there was a no questions asked 100% COVID refund policy implemented. I think that's seemingly becoming the standard for obvious reasons. And as we learn more about the virus, we did shift going into the winter. We now know it only lives in the air up to 3 hours at most under ideal conditions. So we decided to eliminate that 1 day buffer and just modify the checkout and check-in time such that there were still 5 hours between guests now, or there are 5 hours between guests now. And we kept that COVID refund policy in effect through the winter, so that, if there's someone sick or you need to quarantine, etc., we still allow that flexibility, of course. One thing to note that what we usually do is we open for reservations for an entire year, and we decided to only open. When we reopened in June, we only opened for reservations through the middle of October. With the understanding that things could really hit the fan again, and we didn't want to have this situation where we needed to refund an entire winter's worth of reservations. So we held off until, I want to say, September before we opened reservations through winter 2021, and that's where we're at now.
Do you have a feel for the blend of in-state versus out-of-state reservations that you're getting?
I do. Actually, we discussed that we're about 80% of Vermonters making these reservations and 20% out of state. So that feels good in a lot of ways. And it's also exciting, just looking beyond COVID, to know that we have a lot of market out there to capture still.
And what do you see as the biggest challenge for the rest of the winter for you, as well as, what's one word or phrase that you might put out there as what you're going to need to overcome that challenge?
Yeah, I think we need to be creative, if that's a word that we could kind of expand upon. There's for us, it hasn't been as dire as we were thinking it may have been in terms of the demand. I think, people want to be outside, as we just heard. The gear is hard to come by, whether that be supply chain issues or just demand. And so as a result, our huts are pretty damn near full all winter. And the creativity part, I think, speaks to, the need, if there is a rise in cases, if there continues to be a rise in cases and it escalates to a point where there needs to be additional restrictions, we need to think more nuanced and not have these kind of sweeping restrictions, because there's obviously activities and actions that are safer than others, and places of business and lodging situations that are easier to manage than others. So we just have to think a little creatively and not have an axe instead of a scalpel, to use that analogy.
Yeah, that's a concept that's come up in a lot of these conversations as well. I mean, I think we certainly all understand from a policy perspective how much easier it is to use a blanket policy or a blanket set of regulations. But what we're starting to see is with the businesses and operations that are up and running is there is some confusion between outdoor recreation, recreational sports, competitive sports, all those things from 100 yards away may seem very much the same, but when you get up close and personal, particularly from a COVID perspective, they're quite different. Well, move over to Luke O'Brien now. Luke, could you introduce yourself? Oh wait, RJ, you got one
last. I just want to say one last thing, since this is being recorded. The folks at ACCD have been throughout this whole process have applied logic in all of our correspondences. So it's been refreshing to have that sort of relationship. So I just want to highlight that and say thanks.
Noted. That's at 1:35:41 on the recording, if anybody wants to jot that down. All right, so we'll move over to Luke. Luke, could you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about District 5?
Sure. Hey, folks, it's great to be here and hope to share some experiences we've had up here in the Northeast Kingdom. I am the Forest Rec Specialist for the Department of Forest Parks and Recreation. So I'm technically with the forestry staff here, and we manage over 200,000 acres, including state parks, state forests, wildlife management areas, plus a whole host of private timberlands with public access easements. So pretty substantial infrastructure up here in this part of the state. Admittedly, it doesn't get as much use as some areas, but then you also have hot spots like Burke Mountain or Lake Willoughby that see tremendous amounts of use. So I work with a pretty broad variety of user groups, skiers, bikers, hikers, hunters, snowmobilers, horseback riders, you name it.
That's great. And so in terms of getting ready for, or even starting to adjust to the new normal, I mean, one big shift for you has been the fact that the Canadian border's been closed. So how did you start adjusting? When did you start adjusting, and what did that process look like?
Yeah, I think the writing was on the wall pretty early for us with the state of Vermont, and we started our work from home pretty early, and I think the most valuable thing we did early on in March and April and into the spring was holding biweekly meetings with our partners, and then alternating that with biweekly meetings with our staff. So not so much to let people know, what to do, what not to do. It's not like we had all the answers, but I felt like it was a good way of sharing information, sharing perspectives, and kind of acting as a clearinghouse for info. And then we would go back to our own internal staff discussions and try to do it on our own lands and kind of learn from that, and then come back to the group. So there was a lot of back and forth communication. I thought that was probably the most valuable aspect of our early preparation.
Absolutely. Talking and listening is certainly a key in this whole process. And then what are some of the very specific actions that came out of that communication with those partners?
Well, I think, we all knew that there was going to be a lot of demand. The governor was certainly encouraging folks to get out in the woods and on the trails. So we knew there was going to be a lot of pressure, and, the show must go on. We had hundreds of thousands of dollars of state contracts that needed to be executed. We had to figure out how to do those safely, how to work with our partners to see that they could do the work safely. And if not, how do we adjust? What changes do we have to make, or how can we be flexible to support them to get sort of that essential infrastructure up and running, but also just, maintained in good order?
And so, one of the projects you worked on was just a communication piece, a poster. Can you talk a little bit about that and who the partners were on that?
It was pretty much everybody in the Trails and Greenways Council. There was a lot of input from all the different user groups, but just a single piece that we could put up at all of our trailheads, and it was formatted in a way that anybody could take that and put that out on their trail system, so that the word was getting out about social distancing, or not going out when you're sick, or not congregating in trailheads and that sort of thing. I think that was really helpful. People don't always read those signs, but I think at least we're making the effort, and at least we're trying to put it in front of their faces whenever they're accessing a public trailhead or a facility.
One of the other things that you and I talked about in terms of just this year, and the, unprecedented is the word that we've heard way too many times since last spring, but the changes in workload. I know you have some new parking zones that are part of your plate. Even receiving additional funding this fall added more challenges to your plate. Could you talk a little bit first, anyway, about the parking and how just as one zone and one parking zone, just some of the challenges and important elements of managing a spot like that?
Yeah, I think that like we said, the use is up, so we need to respond to the pressure. We had this opportunity with CARES Act funds that really allowed us to respond in a lot of ways, improving our roads, improving our trailheads, literally, resurfacing trailheads and parking lots, putting in new kiosks, which is a great opportunity. It was a challenge, certainly, to drop everything and to meet those deadlines. It was a pretty tight schedule. But we pulled off quite a bit of work. I don't know if there's any projects that were not funded, or that were funded that were not completed. So it's a huge success. I think with the parking, I think we spoke about one lot that we had an issue with the town and the plow turnaround, and issues of people blocking the plow, and on any other winter, maybe any other location, you might say, okay, well, we're not going to plow this lot, or we're going to close the trail down for the winter. But I think with COVID and the pressure that we're expecting, we had to go the extra mile to really negotiate hard with the community, with the landowners, and do it all in a matter of 5 to 10 days to get a solution worked out, because winter's knocking on the door.
Right. It almost seems like we're sort of in a little bit of a blessing by having a slow starting winter. Gives everybody a little more time.
Yeah.
What do you see looking ahead to this winter is going to be one of the biggest challenges, as well as, and then what do you think you're going to need to get through that challenge?
Yeah, well, I'm with RJ. When he says creativity, I think that's spot on. And then the other thing I would say is we just need patience. I think folks need to be understanding that we're all in this together. We all complement each other: state lands, nonprofits, for-profits, the business groups, private landowners, and the recreation users. We got to be patient with each other, and we got to adapt. So, I don't think it's about money necessarily, certainly in terms of public infrastructure, but it's just people using common sense and being respectful, and God help us, hopefully we can get through this season unscathed.
It's interesting. It's interesting that the comment about patience. That's something that actually came up with Laura when she and I were talking about customers coming into the retail shop, and how, even though the businesses and the organizations have thought a ton about this, as soon as somebody comes in as a user or a consumer, they're in consumer mode. They're looking to walk in, spend their money, and get out. And I think that message of patience may be one that would be one to think about as well. Well, thanks, Luke. I see Stephen Wright has joined us from JPeak. Stephen, could I ask you to just give a quick introduction and tell us what's going on up at J today?
Sure. My name's Steve Wright. I'm the president and general manager here at JPeak. In terms of what's going on here today, we sold 22 lift tickets. Last year, same day, we sold 753.
There you go.
So,
that sets the stage pretty well there, I think.
The stage for us.
So in terms of your preseason plans, when did you and the J team start looking ahead at this winter, and what did that focused effort look like?
Yeah, I mean, we started, pretty shortly after we shut things down, a week or so before St. Patrick's Day back in March. I mean, we started to build out safety and safety protocols and operating protocols for the winter right at that point, right? We knew that, some of the things that we built were going to be relevant in the summer. And we knew that it was going to take us a few months to build a winter plan. And it's, as the state changes its guidance and evolves its guidance, the plan has to change with it. I just got off a call with some of the folks at ACCD just about, what does it look like once case counts start to drop and we start to slowly reopen the state again? What are some of those phases, and what does it look like? And, will it follow the same trajectory as when we close the state down? Does it reopen in that same sequence? Yeah, I mean, we spent most of the summer fine tuning this, and we opened a few weeks ago, and we're starting to execute against that plan. And we're realizing that, some of what we put down works really well, and some of what we put together doesn't, and we're having to change that on the fly.
Could you talk? I mean, could you talk a little bit about that? What were some of the? I mean, you had mentioned some of the blanket policies. People in the lodge, people in the restaurants, et cetera, et cetera. Talk a little bit about what some of those adjustments have been, and then what are some real world teaching moments you've had so far? Yeah,
our big fear, from the moment we closed was when we reopened, how are we going to get people safely inside, right? We, outside riding a lift, skiing in the woods, skiing on open trails, walking around the baselands. We didn't envision that to be too much of a problem, too much of a risk. But it was the inside piece that we were really nervous about. And, now going on 3 weeks of open here, we've seen no pressure on our indoor spaces at all. I think that our guests, we've messaged to our guests so well, the industry has, that there's not a lot of interest in going inside anyway. Now it's been 30 degrees every weekend, and there hasn't been a real need to get inside. So when temps start to drop and the wind starts to blow, we'll see how good that theory holds. But we haven't really seen the inside compression yet. And what little compression we have seen has been very quick. It's been go to the bathroom, get a pre-made sandwich, stuff it in your coat, head back outside. So we're really hopeful about that. We've built a bunch of these outdoor microclimates with wind shields and food trucks and, fire pits and composite seating and things like that. We've seen a lot of folks hit that already. So to the extent the weather and conditions allow for it, I think we'll still see a lot of that outdoor aggregating. One of the things we hadn't expected would be difficult this quickly is maze management in the lines. We've seen, we've seen some people get too close to other folks. We've seen people enter our lift lines without masks. And I think that, JPeak has sort of a laid back vibration to it. And I think when people land here, they expect our employees to have to take a laid back approach to the virus. And we're almost a complete antithesis of that at this point. We've got, a wellness, this Everclean team that is, in orange tack vests with, masks and sanitizer in one pocket and tape and everything else. And they've been sort of parading through our common areas the hotel lobbies, the lift lines, the interior spaces, our parking lots, engaging with the guests. And we're doing it respectfully, but we're letting folks know that, the guidance is the guidance, and we're not messing around with it. You're either going to adhere to that, or you're going to have to find a different place to ski. And I think that has been a little bit of a rub initially. And I think that will improve as people realize that it's, we're taking a legit approach to enforcing some of this. But, the first few steps of the season have been a little difficult on that front, as it has been at most of the resorts that, that I've spoken with.
So for the folks, if they haven't been to Jay Peak, Jay has, in addition to indoor facilities and lift access skiing and things like that, it also has an ice rink and some other community and regional resources. What are you doing with those operations, and how does that fit into what you're doing?
Well, we've got an NHL size hockey rink that we usually run 46 weekends of 16 team tournaments in, that rent 10 to 12 rooms each team. All of that lodging has been vaporized, all the revenue with it, all the per caps with it, that's all gone. And we can't do a hell of a lot with the rink, quite frankly, because of what the guidance suggests, or what the guidance tells us that we can do with it at this point. I'm spending between $8,000 and $10,000 a month just in utilities to keep that sheet of ice in there. And I would melt the thing out in a heartbeat, because it doesn't look like we're going to get any guidance that allows clubs to come back in to participate. But it's the only ice sheet for these kids in the Northeast Kingdom that go to St. J Academy or Linden or North Country or Danville. There's a bunch of hockey players there that if we take this ice out, they don't have a season. So we've worked with some of the local high schools to try to figure out a path forward, but not having guidance at the state level about when high school sports are going to come back has sort of limited us to really what we can, how much more we can extend ourselves. So we're hoping that we hear something between Christmas and New Year's on when those kids are going to be allowed to practice again. And then on the water park front, it's a 65,000 square foot indoor water park. It can accommodate 900 people at any given time, and the state guidance right now is we can allow 75 people in there. The break even on a pro forma in that building is, if we have one guest less than 60, we lose money. So that narrow band of profitability between 60 people and 75 people is where we're at. And in theory, every single day that we sell less than 60 tickets, we lose money in that facility, even with a really pared down experience. So, I've turned all the lifeguards and the general manager over in the water park essentially into accountants at this point. And all they're doing, aside from, swinging their whistle, is looking at spreadsheets, making sure that they understand, when to reduce slides and when we have to sort of close the place altogether, because it doesn't make any financial sense to do so. So, and then we've got an indoor climbing facility with an indoor movie theater, and that's just too big of a pain in the ass to operate. Honestly, you can't keep that place cleaned. You can't keep people separate. There's no chance for distancing in there. So we've closed that altogether. We have about 11 restaurants and eateries here. We've closed 8 of them. And probably 6 of those 8 have no plans to reopen. We're running a small deli, a small convenience store, and 1 restaurant on weekends only at this point. And then just to add one more layer of it, at this point, we should be about 100% full over about 900 rooms for the Christmas holiday. Here we are 10 days before Christmas. We should be pretty well jacked up with those rooms at this point. We're about 30% full at this point. And every single day this week, we have booked between $35,000 and $40,000 a day in packages for Christmas week. And we have refunded between $50,000 and $55,000 a day for Christmas week. So we're taking in $1 and we're giving back $250. So that's, I'm an English major, but that's math.
Yeah, it was my understanding there would be no math.
Right.
So, obviously the bottom line impact is there. Do you have a feeling for what the employee impact has been as well, in terms of the number of staff that has not been rehired?
Yeah, we should have about, we employ 1,500 people here at any given time when we're fully operational. We've got 500 on the payroll, 525 on the payroll at this point. And of those 525, we have 180 working. So we should have that 1,500 number leading into this period. The week before Christmas for us is huge with group business, and we've got none of that here because of the multiple households guidance. But we have about 185 people on staff when it should be about 1,500.
Steve, could you talk just briefly about for every ski area, the year is not a year of even months. There are peak months and down months. Could you talk just a little bit about how the flow of a ski area economics works?
Sure. I mean, you spend on a 52-week calendar, you essentially dig yourself a hole across about 39 weeks of that period, and then you spend 10 to 12 weeks going positive and filling that hole in. So what happened to us is and what happened to every ski resort in the industry, we got to about March, right? And March ends up being a big month for filling that hole back in. So we missed that opportunity. So we dug ourselves a big hole, right through Christmas of last year. We started to fill it in. We stopped filling it in around St. Patrick's Day. And then we dug that hole deeper between St. Patrick's Day, and we continue to dig that hole right now. And what we're going to miss this year is that opportunity to fill it back in at all. We're just going to dig that hole straight through until next Christmas of fiscal 21. So that's it's a tough position to be in, like any business in hospitality in the state of Vermont. At this point, it's about, can we get relief funds, from the federal government at some point to try to help us fill that hole in.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I was going to ask you, what's your one-word answer on what JPeak and other ski areas are going to need to get through the year? But I think I know what you're going to say. Yeah, exactly. Help.
Cash.
I mean, cash is right. In addition to capital, how could that money be used best to support Jay?
Well, I mean, it would be a refunding of the PPP program, so we can figure out a way to to keep our employees engaged. My big fear isn't necessarily this winter. Honestly, we've punted on this winter as a ski industry. It's how do we rescue the summer? I mean, I've got 70 weddings on the books, starting Memorial Day all the way to Indigenous Peoples Day, and if we lose those weddings because of travel restrictions or the lack of an ability for groups to gather, again, it just deepens that hole. So, and the other piece is, these ski resorts are massive infrastructures. Generally, they're spending, 5 or 6% of their top line revenue number in capital every single year, and that capital is not going to be there. The need to spend it isn't going to go away, though. It's just going to can's going to get kicked down the road, and it's going to have to be dealt with at some point.
Well, thanks, Steve. I really appreciate your perspective there. Ollie, we're going to come over to you now. Ollie, could you introduce yourself and tell us what's going on in Craftsbury today?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Ollie Burris. As I said at the beginning of the meeting, I'm the race director and landowner relations coordinator at the Craftsbury Outdoor Center. So we're a four-season trail center up in the Northeast Kingdom. So not necessarily neighbors to Steve over there at JPeak, but not that far down the road. As far as sort of representing what the Outdoor Center does and how this has impacted us, I guess it's been a massive impact. We normally in the summer, we run adult learn to scull programs with drawing guests in from all over the world to come for all-in-one sort of week-long camps where they scull on the lake down here. Some of you may have heard about the lake from some of the stories in Vermont sports about lake use issues, but no problems this summer because we canceled all of those, because how do you have international guests come in during COVID? We hit the ground running with that massive disruption to what we were doing, and then it's just continued on. I guess Drew, you can sort of point me where you want to go with this.
Yeah, for sure.
All sorts of different stuff, but
it's really interesting. So, in terms of Craftsbury and how it's set up, I mean, you're the race director and landowner relations coordinator and a coach, right? Yep. But Craftsbury, how are you being considered an outdoor business, a ski area, a recreational sports operator, and what guidelines are you being asked to follow?
Yes, I think would be the proper answer there. Again, it was fun to listen to what Steve had to say, because I sort of was thinking, oh, we do that, but smaller. Oh, we do that, but smaller. Oh, we do that, but also smaller. So we have lodging. We've got cabins, cottages, and then a dormitory, which has, shared bathrooms and all that sort of stuff, that in an average season summer is completely full, almost from about the end of May all the way through to about the beginning of October, with these rowing camps and other sorts of programs. And then the same thing starts up again in the winter. So that is the lodging side of the business, which has been, as you can imagine, pretty eviscerated. When the travel restrictions still existed, we were doing our best to encourage folks from approved counties to come up and stay with us and to book their lodging ahead of time based on that travel map. And then, in October, I think it was, when that shifted entirely, maybe November, time is meaningless now, that really put a damper on what we felt comfortable offering from a lodging front, because like anyone who's dealing with lodging, or even Laura dealing with the sort of offshoot of people coming to these resort communities, you can only trust what people tell you. And if, there's what steps and what hoops do you want to jump through to try to get attestations about quarantining and where people are coming from and that sort of stuff. So we've really scaled that down to basically trying to only take lodging from within Vermont. And we are lower than a 10% occupancy rate year to date. So the lodging has really hurt. From a outdoor recreation versus recreational sports type of thing, all summer we operated as though we were a trail center. We've got mountain bike trails and ski trails that people can access, and that was fine. And so we closed all of our buildings to the public. Normally we have a fitness center with a gym and bathrooms and a big touring center that's open all summer, and then an additional event space that we built a couple of years ago to catch the overflow. And we closed all of that immediately. I think we closed that probably in mid-March, right when things started to shut down with the pandemic, and haven't opened any of those yet. So everyone's pitting out of their cars in the parking lot and getting out and riding. And we paved a roller ski track this summer, so we had people using that. And that seemed to be really good. Outdoor rec was great for people's mental health. But now coming into the winter, we consider ourselves a ski area. I think when the state talks about ski areas, they're thinking a lot more about Steve than they are about me. So we started to try to reconcile how we run our business with what we are expected to do by the state. So we had to implement a reservation system to require, because we don't have a lift line where we can figure out who's coming and when and keep all of that contact tracing info. So we needed a reservation system to capture all of that info. So we started that, and trying to set up a reservation system with a legacy user group that's used to just walking onto the trails from any number of different places has been really interesting. Luckily, and I say this one time and one time only, luckily there's not that much snow right now. So it makes it a little bit easier for us to troubleshoot that stuff, but it's been different for sure. And then the other portion of our model, and I think the reason that the Outdoor Center is known in Vermont and exists the way that it does, is that we have a ton of programming to introduce people to cross-country skiing, running, biathlon, and mountain biking. So in the wintertime, we have 200 some club members who participate in some sort of programming, ranging from what we jokingly call our Wildcats program, which is just getting kids rental skis at 4 or 5 years old and trying to help them shuffle around in a field and teaching a couple parents how to guide that. And then we've got learn to ski programs through, starting at around age 6. We have elite high school, junior racing programs where we've placed kids onto the, junior world championship and U23 world championship teams. We've got college athletes who train with us in the summertime. We've got an elite development program that has, for skiing and rowing, that's put athletes onto the last couple Olympic teams. And then we coach a group of masters. So Carol comes and trains with me a couple times a week. And all of that was paused when the state put their moratorium in on sport, which, well, frustrating. I totally understand. I mean, the way that you deal with a pandemic is you start to paint with a broad brush. And I think any time that you start to get nuanced is when you start to create loopholes. So I totally understand the really tough position that the folks at the executive branch at ACCD, at the health department, have found themselves in. But what I've come to find, especially over these last few days where we've had skiing available, is cross-country skiing is a really, really difficult sport to get into. I mean, everyone can go out and tromp around in the woods, but if you want to really master it and have fun and get that sensation of just sort of flying along on a trail and not looking at the next uphill and thinking, man, I don't want to go up that, you need help. You need coaching, you need technique work, and we can't do any of that. So I'm watching a lot of kids when I go over to work and help set up, the flow of visitor traffic. I see a lot of really frustrated athletes that we can't work with, and that breaks my heart. So that's been one of the toughest things, just on a personal level. And I don't really know what the answer is in terms of coming back from it, because one more bit of this is we live in a tiny, tiny community. Craftsbury's got, under 2,000 residents, and we are one of the biggest drivers for the reason that people come here. And so we recognized right from the jump that we had an outsized role in preventing COVID from coming to our community. And now, I mean, unfortunately, it's in every community in Vermont, but for a long time, it didn't really seem that way. So every decision that we made all summer, looking ahead to the winter, looking ahead to whatever even the thing we did the next week was, are we going to put our community at risk for bringing someone here who might transmit the virus to these people? And that was also really tough, because with all of the negatives that could come from possible transmission, also come all those positives of, we're the reason that some of these businesses in Craftsbury can hold on through winter months. And not being able to tell people in good faith that we want them to come here is really hard. And it's just a complete change for sort of the reason that all of us get into these types of businesses is we want to share the stoke with everybody. And so that's been just an absolute, there are a lot of terms for it. It's been weird.
Yeah, I mean, and just to sort of back up, I mean, this is, of all the conversations, the conversation with you has really sort of brought up this overlap of outdoor recreation, recreational sports, competitive sports, and Craftsbury is, I mean, there are loopholes, but there's also, being painted into a corner from three different sides. And it is interesting. And I think I would like to just sort of dig in with you about the competitive sports side of it, the events, the club side, how sort of describe how big that would have been, and describe what you're able to do and how you're running racing or training right now.
Totally. Yeah. So as far as how big it would have been, I mean, the Outdoor Center has ramped back up our events calendar over the last 5 or 6 years. I came in 2015 and started bringing more elite national and international level racing back to this part of Vermont. So that sort of culminated, I think, with our biggest event. We hosted the national championships in January of 2019. We had, I think probably 1,100 unique participants come for that event, whether they were parents, athletes, support staff, coaches, whatever. We were hosting some pretty big days, and that has all gone out the window. This year we were due to host the UVM Winter Carnival, which would have coincided with a New England Nordic Ski Association series of races, a super tour, which is sort of the highest level of domestic cross-country racing in the United States. And then we were also supposed to host the spring national championships. All of that went away with the moratorium on competitive athletics. And that's sort of the thing that I was alluding to before, where we're driving business and in this community through rental properties, filling up hotels in otherwise off times of the year, driving, catering businesses and all that sort of stuff. So that's all gone. And that has really changed my job for sure as an event director, to not really have any events to do. But then just because there are no events doesn't mean that athletes stop training. We've got a bunch of, like I mentioned, Olympic development athletes who live here in housing provided by the Outdoor Center. They help us with our programs and help around at the Outdoor Center. In exchange, their training is supported and their racing aspirations are supported. Well, there's still a World Cup going on in Europe. So how do those athletes figure out what the avenues for qualification are if they are expected to figure, if their competitors nationwide are still racing, but we can't race here in Vermont? Same thing goes for our juniors. So we've tried to do what we can. Our coaching staff has been sending out, training plans that we hope athletes can execute virtually. The competitive athletes are resilient for sure. And especially at the senior level. and even trickling down into the junior level. But when we start to get into middle school kids who are just getting into competing with cross country skiing, like they come because they want to see their buddies. They come because they've got a coaching staff that tries to make this sometimes incredibly frustrating sport fun. And it's really difficult to do that on their own. And much like in the way that we hear people parents talk about having to become educators, we can't expect parents to become coaches too. And so we're really worried about losing a group of athletes who would be otherwise, like uniquely able to get into this sport through the largesse of the Grassbury Outdoor Center, making it, cheaper and making sure that they have access to snow and all that sort of stuff. But if we can't be there to foster them along, then we might not see them again next winter. And that is really hard for a sport like Nordic skiing, which isn't getting any bigger necessarily. I mean, we're trying to make sure it doesn't get any smaller, but yeah, it's not exactly like basketball where you see it every day,
Right.
So that part's pretty rough.
Well, so one of the things that came up in our conversation that I hadn't really realized was sort of within this, once again, this conversation about outdoor recreation, recreational sports, and competitive sports is that a private school that's an athletic academy is able to train right now in the state of Vermont, right? And we talk a little bit about loopholes, but it does also kind of go back to what I was saying from the retail space is a widening gap between the haves and have-nots. If you have the opportunity to be at a private academy, you get all those benefits. If you are a middle school kid in Hardwick, not so much. Moving forward and looking at this coming, the rest of this winter, what's something that you're working on to kind of try to tackle this?
Yeah. So I've been working on as many fronts as I can. I work with, through the programming that we run here at the Outdoor Center. We spearheaded writing a reopening proposal that we actually, big ups to Jessica Savage for suggesting that and telling me to pursue that. So we got over a dozen clubs from throughout the state of Vermont to sign on to this reopening proposal that essentially advocated for why skiing as a sport should still be considered a safe outdoor activity. I mean, you put skis on your feet and poles in your hands, and it's hard to get closer than 6 feet to somebody. We are outdoors where, yes, we're breathing hard, but there seems to be no, evidence of cases through athletic endeavors like that. I mean, we watched the Tour de France and a bunch of other grand tours in Europe go ahead with massive pelotons of riders, and none of the COVID cases that they had associated with those were traced back to the actual competition. It was all in the hotel, in the restaurant, on the bus, that sort of stuff. So we're really hopeful that the state will take a look. And so we submitted this proposal on Monday. Hopefully it's going in front of the Restart Committee on Thursday, and we'll learn what's next to just get back to training. We know that competition is probably not going to be a reality, at least in any real recognizable form this winter. And honestly, we've given up on that one. That ship has sailed. We just want to get back to working with kids. So we've got the reopening proposal coming from the club level. I'm also working with the VPA really closely. We end up hosting a ton of VPA races just as a facility that's able to hold on to snow and has an in-house events team. We can really help a lot of these smaller schools where the coach doesn't have to worry about timing the race and all that. So gotten really close with a ton of VPA coaches. I'm helping advise them on some protocols that they're going to work through with the Agency of Education, because I think it's one of the other things about this. And I'm loath to speak ill of our state employees, because I know what you guys are doing is so hard, but it does seem sort of Byzantine when there's one group that's working with one set of people and there's another group that's working with another set of people, but they're still talking about Nordic skiing in the same way. And I imagine it's really hard for those different agencies to communicate with each other because everything's coming a mile a minute. I don't want to be in your shoes. What you're doing is so hard, and we really respect it, but it leads to a lot of, like you mentioned, sort of loopholes, or, okay, well, is it an organized sport or is it a recreational sport or is it a competitive sport? Are there different rules for those things? What counts as an interaction between households? Are two people standing 10 feet apart receiving the same instruction from another person who's 15 feet apart? Are they interacting? Is that bad? There are just a lot of questions, and one of the hard things here is we all thought this was going to be over, right? I mean, everybody's thought, okay, at the end, in the beginning of the summer, it was the end of the summer. And then in the fall, hopefully by the end of the fall, something like that. And so we're constantly changing what we think is appropriate so that we learn to live in these realities with the virus and all of that. And so we wind up having these conversations about, oh, well, we can do this for practice and that. And then you step away for 10 minutes or a day and you come back and you think, man, that plan doesn't work at all. And so it's really just hard to not feel as though we have cohesive guidance coming down. But I also can't say that I blame anybody, because it's so hard to try to figure out, as these states, like whack-a-mole, you know, something comes up that might lead to transmission. We got to hit that over there. And it has all these ramifications over here that nobody even thought about. And so it's, I mean,
yeah, I think we all agree. I think everybody on this call would agree that,
sure.
You know, on one side of it, you have a blanket statement, which leaves a lot of need for nuance. And then you have over here a bunch of nuanced statements, which just have a bunch of needs for blanket statements. And so there is a, you know, I mean, first of all, we all look really smart for living in Vermont right now. I get, you know, 10 emails a week from people around the country who are super jealous that we're here. So, you know, we're clearly doing some things right. I do think that, you know, this is a great environment for people to, you know, talk, freely about these topics that are affecting us all, because I think we all do care about how this all goes. But thank you very much, Ollie. I think that's a really great perspective, and I think that summed it up really well. And Commissioner Snyder,
pleasure.
Absolutely, Commissioner Snyder, I'm gonna drop it back over to you if you have any questions, or if anybody else has some questions. I do want to point out that Molly Mahar did put in here a clarification that academies are cleared to train one-on-one only at this point. So just to be clear on that stuff. But Commissioner Snyder, do you want to put a stamp on this, or do you have any questions?
Well, thank you, Drew. Thanks to all the panelists. I think that was really great. Just so much there. I've got a few notes. I'm already kind of freaking about how much I'm going to forget, or not be able to capture.
Right.
That's a lot and really valuable. Thank you. We're right on time. Thank you, Drew, for coordinating that well. I think unless there's going to be a revolt, I'd like to chair's prerogative and suggest questions. Any further follow-up to any of these panelists? I think RJ had to drop off, but for Laura, Steve, anybody, Ollie, any questions from anybody before we move on to the next segment? Because that was really rich and there's a lot to unpack, I think. Questions, suggestions? I'll say this to you, Ollie. I wish you all well. And I have a 6-year-old skier who, after we ride the lifts and then we go free our heels, she wants to know when we're going to go back to the fun kind of skiing every time we go Nordic skiing. So I'm with you on that. And I need professional help here. So I need you to get back to working with these little kids. And we're all pulling in the same direction there. But
send her our way. We'll get her fixed up right. And then you won't be able to keep up anymore, Mike.
I hear that. I'm familiar with this, and that's what I'm looking forward to. No, we're not going to give up, but thank you. Anyway, I bought us a little time there. Anybody have anything they want to add here? Because otherwise we'll just move along with our thanks. I guess I'd say this, buying more time for any of you who want to jump in. Like this VOREC thing, particularly the panel, the steering committee, was to create in many ways was to create a portal, a mechanism that didn't exist for incoming and for engagement. I just want to flag that this is perfect. This is what this is for. And I think for each of us, for me in particular, my spot, Josh, to the same extent, with a direct connection to the governor, to keep the communications flowing. And I know the questions that we're all grappling with here is, as Ollie was mentioning, Jessica's been representing us and trying to interpret all this stuff, get questions answered. It's all in the mix, and this is just another exceptionally rich and important, valuable way to contribute to the decision making. I think what I'm trying to say is it was created to make a mechanism like this, and I'm promising you that your input here through your presentations are actually helping us fuel those decisions. I think change, I would say, for example, don't give up on competitions just yet. I think it's being actively looked at, and I think that the distinctions and differences are becoming known. The idea of staggered starts, and they're looking at this, and I think that this is helpful to have the communication. That's all I'm trying to say. Sorry, appreciate it. I hope you'll hang in there. Is really also what I'm saying. Drew, can you see anybody wanting to speak? I'm trying to pull up the chat here.
There was a question from Gina about Ollie. Do you want to just rephrase that question as well as your answer?
Sure. Yeah. Gina asked, if buildings are closed and cross-country networks are vast and involve multiple landowners, why are they subject to the same reservation requirements as downhill areas? And my response was, closing a building was our specific Craftsbury Outdoor Center response, but I don't believe that that's universal by any means at cross-country areas. I mean, there are areas that have retail shops, and they are going to want to try to get whatever business that they can. So I think, I don't really necessarily have a problem with the idea that outdoor, cross-country areas need to be subject to some sort of contact tracing, especially if they have any sort of central locus. But somebody else from the state can speak to that if they want to.
This is Josh here. I think you're right. I think it's just to know who is there. If they need to reach out, if someone was on your property for any length of time, the state wants to be able to know who that was. So if there was an outbreak, they can reach them. And you guys are being put on the front line and are being inscripted into service, if you will, to be part of this. And that's a challenge. And, Molly probably has a much better answer than that. And, I just feel for you guys and knowing that we're deliberately cutting your business off because you got to do the right thing. And it's heartbreaking.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, Molly does have her hand up. Go for it, Molly.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we did speak with ACCD on behalf of the cross-country ski areas because we do have a number of them as members. And it became clear, at first we were starting to approach it like we could have two sets of guidance, but as we were working on it, we realized that the indoor guidance was going to be the same, and in that ski areas, cross-country ski areas, may be attracting people from out of state. Really what Josh was just saying, that the contact tracing and the collecting attestations, making sure that guests are abiding by the travel restrictions does all apply. And, we even had the conversation about multiple, access points to trailheads, and not everybody pulls into the parking lot and buys a ticket and heads on their way. And so, that makes it difficult to comply, but, what the answer is just for season pass holders, certainly, to explain to them, please check in with us if you're going to use the trail system. It's because we are trying to comply with the state guidelines, and not everybody necessarily will do that every time. But, I think if you explain to people that this is why we're asking you to do it, most people will try to do that. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful.
Thanks, Molly. Laura has her hand up. Go for it, Laura.
Thank you. And this might go back to Molly as well. And I'm definitely not trying to add to my workload as it is now. But I have had some questions from our employees wondering where we are considered a little bit more on the front line, especially with a close interaction with closed doors at this point. How and maybe why not retail hasn't been asked to contact trace. We don't have a way to figure out necessarily who's been in the store other than credit card transactions. But one of the recommendations I've made to our staff is, well, you are more than welcome to stay behind the plexiglass and not have those close interactions. But as we get deeper into this, and if it keeps going, has that been considered? And where do you see maybe some of the hardships that would stop us from being able to do that?
I don't have an answer to that. Does anyone on the call have a credible answer?
I could take a stab at it.
Thanks, Molly.
I think, retail does have restrictions in terms of number of people that can be in the store. And I think, what we've heard from the governor is that they are, very much looking at all the contact tracing data, and they are making adjustments to guidance based on what they're seeing out of that data. So I think if they started to see problems stemming from the retail environment, they probably would change the guidance, but right now they're not seeing that. And so I think that's why.
Thank you. That's really helpful for me to be able to take back to our staff. I think that'll give them a little bit more comfort. So thank you.
And I'll just add real quickly, reservations at a restaurant, yes, you have to have all that information. And it's also but retail exchanges, it's also just a practical thing that if every single person that went through a convenience, I mean, you'd be adding time for that interaction face to face to collect that. And the practical ability to do that is really difficult. And I think this is one of those areas where the governor is saying, we can't do everything every single place. So this one is going to be really difficult for folks to have to engage on every single thing they buy. So we'll save that until if things get really bad, hopefully not, before we go there.
Thank you. Both of those comments actually helped me take back a message to the staff that is just kind of wondering why not. So thank you for that.
Super. Well, there we go again, being all VOREC with the two-way street of communications. I love it. Thank you for that. Ollie, do you have a hand up again, or is that a vestige from a more curious time?
No, that was up, and I worry that I was really negative throughout my entire presentation, and I wanted to share that I thought of this while I was making breakfast this morning, and then it slipped my mind until just now. But I am really, really confident that cross-country skiing is actually going to be in a better position coming out of the pandemic than it was going into it. And so for those of you who have businesses that are related to cross country, I think unlike alpine, hockey, whatever other winter sport, like you can ski out your front door, and there are going to be people looking for a way all over the country to find some solace from this thing if they live in a snowy climate. And so I'm really hopeful that come next year, fingers crossed, when people can travel to Vermont, we're going to see an uptick in people who got into cross-country skiing because they didn't have anything better to do in the winter during the pandemic. So that's my silver lining that I'm going to cling to desperately like a life raft at the end of Titanic.
Well, I'm glad you got that in, Ollie. And I don't know if you were with us at the very beginning. I said something similar about outdoor activity writ large and being certainly part of the solution now, but maybe making us even better on the other side, and perhaps parlaying this all for kind of the vision. What we've been talking about is just better living through outdoor recreation and better connection to the planet and each other and our banking accounts. Great. Any other last panel kind of questions or comments? Laura, Molly's hands are up. Are those new hands? Hal.
I just wanted to say thanks to all the panel members. It was really insightful. Speaking for myself, I've been a little isolated here for several months, and just focused on my own little sliver of the outdoor recreation business. And to hear from all these experts who are just out there doing it right now is it's really insightful. So thanks for taking the time. It's really valuable, and what you're all doing is extremely valuable. So thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Hal. That I would echo that. I think we all would. So Laura, RJ, Luke, Ollie, Steve, thank you all for your time and your insights. Just as Hal says, he said it perfectly. So with that, we'll Drew, I can't say pivot now. I was going to pivot. I'll segue now so that we won't lose Drew. Jessica, do you want to give us an update on the grant program and